In the contemporary world, there are very few remaining contexts that are completely insulated from technological artifacts. Assuming that you're not living in one of those contexts, take the next 10 seconds to ponder how technology shapes your everyday life. More than likely, your everyday is saturated with these interactions. Your professional work, physical exercise, and entertaining yourself in your free time are all contexts that have experienced disruptive shifts over a relatively short time to be increasingly facilitated through technology. Then there's all of the things you probably did not consider, such as basic societal infrastructure that we take for granted. Bus schedules, emergency service systems, banking, and logistics are all examples of systems that have been greatly streamlined by technology and carry critical societal functions.
How many times have you been frustrated because this technology didn't work correctly? In situations where the interactions between you and technology break down due to various reasons, it is in human nature to imagine how things could be made to work better. If you have spent time imagining solutions for these sorts of problems, you may unwittingly have been in the mindset of a human-computer interaction designer, examining interactions between humans and technology and thinking about what could be.
The HCI field is multidisciplinary, combining computer science with human factors, cognitive science, psychology, and more. We won't go deeper into the history of the field in this video, but we offer you some recommended further reading if you feel so inclined. The field in its current shape started to take form in the 80s. A classic example of an issue that illustrated the time before HCI philosophy existed in its current form is found with Xerox, which in the 70s was an office hardware titan that, through not realizing the potential of modern computer interfaces, lost their position in the computer industry. Their inability to put effort towards usability in their office machinery was quite severe, as illustrated by the following video, showing some Xerox employees trying to operate a printer of their own making.
50 originals, but wait a minute, I have 100 originals. We want two-sided copies. Unload top paper tray. What? Reverse order the originals? You gotta be kidding. This is definitely a bug. Press start.
Does that relate to that?
Unload top paper
We didn't do
tray.
that. That's not this. That's not the paper tray. It doesn't say what the paper tray is, huh? So our first batch
Our first,
is SOL.
what is that?
Schön.
However, failures of interaction didn't only happen in the past. Even though the field of HCI has progressed an almost unimaginable distance since its inception in the 80s, the exclusion of proper interaction design is still present in the modern-day systems. Only last year, a live nuclear alert was mistakenly activated in Hawaii, creating widespread panic in the island state. The alert was supposed to be sent in the test environment, but the interface was structured in a way that enabled the operator to accidentally select the live alert in the drop-down menu, and the system subsequently offering no way to manually cancel the alert after it had started. This serves as a lesson to not become complacent and to always strive to design usable products.
There is no one blueprint for how to conduct design work, but there are some common themes that are present in almost every interpretation of design. These themes are, largely in chronological order, research, prototype, evaluate, and iterate. While this list may sound fairly static, remember that you are free to adapt your design process in any way that works for your context. In this segment, we will delve deeper into each one of the themes. In the design process, you may already have some vision of what the ideal design will look like, but in reality, every design situation is limited by constraints. The final design is likely to be very different from the one you initially imagined, and this is normally a result of applying the constraints of reality along the way. In order to understand the full context of your intended design, you need to understand the properties of the users and other stakeholders. Their needs, their values, the context in which the design outcome will be used, and so on. The soul of the design process is to be in service. It does not do to blindly follow what the users or other stakeholders request. As designers, it is imperative to empathize with the stakeholders. We need to make an effort to put ourselves in their shoes. Being in service is required to understand their needs and desires on a deeper level. Think of it as being a butler. You are expected to combine the requests of your stakeholders with your understanding of their greater context to reach an outcome that not only meets but exceeds the expectations of the stakeholders that you serve. The only way to reliably reach this understanding is to conduct stakeholder research. If you have some sort of experience as a researcher, there are a lot of ways in which user research is similar to any other sort of research. The biggest difference between academic research and HCI research might be that we primarily focus on building an understanding of the way that users feel when they interact with the outcome of our design, instead of attempting to reach an objective truth. The ways of conducting research on stakeholders are numerous and often intuitive. Anything that you can do to understand and empathize with your users can technically be called user research. That is, reading about them, interviewing and observing them, conducting workshops to understand their needs, and so on. After collecting user data, the intention is to use it to build a better understanding about the stakeholders, their needs, and their context. To this end, we are able to use the data to create personas. Personas are fictional representations of stakeholders and users that combine characteristics of the target audience. Sometimes it is necessary to divide the characteristics into several different personas to represent different user groups. A sufficiently detailed persona can be used to extrapolate on a lot of situations and help build a strong understanding of how the represented user is likely to act. Personas make us focus on the users and their context, and through this focused lens we are able to improve our understanding of the people who will use our design in its completed state. Through the use of well-constructed personas, you can create a realistic first version of a use scenario, showing the place of the technology in the activities of the user. This scenario can be revisited and improved throughout the design process. Equipped with the increased understanding of the user and their context that is derived from the creation of the personas, we are able to insert the personas into the activity of brainstorming. Brainstorming is a common method to generate ideas in a group, and it is used extensively in the HCI design process. As is the case with any instance of brainstorming, it is important to keep an open mind. Freeing yourself from judgment is not easy, but necessary to the unbridled generation of ideas that is the goal of the method. As the brainstorming progresses and you feel like you have enough ideas to work with, you can start applying judgment on the ideas to figure out which combinations of them would best fit into the context outlined by the personas. As a designer, your role in the brainstorming session might be that of a moderator, where you make sure that everybody stays open-minded and able to contribute with their ideas. Sketching is a common way to represent ideas within brainstorming, keeping in mind that the technical skill is not as important as the rapid communication of concepts related to the brainstorming subject. These sketches are helpful both to inspire further ideas in a group, as well as their function to cognitively offload an idea from your mind to give place for new ideas.
After the designer, typically through research work, discovers the needs of the user, it is time to start spending effort towards the creation of a prototype. To understand the creation of a prototype, it is important to know the steps through which it will typically evolve. Generally, in the context of prototyping, HCI concerns itself with three distinct stages. First, the paper prototype, which is quick and easy. It is normally used to communicate ideas and functionality in a low-fidelity manner. However, it is not suitable to describe detailed information such as colors, exact position of the elements, and so on. The main purpose of the paper prototype is to quickly and effortlessly iterate on early stage designs without bothering too much with the specifics. The paper prototype is followed by the design prototype, a higher fidelity prototype that represents an experience closer to that of using a completed product. The digital prototype, however, can hide interaction flaws behind pretty graphics. Users may avoid honest criticism because they do not want to discard the graphical element. The main purpose of this prototype is to develop a more finalized blueprint of the product without committing to producing a functional prototype. Finally, the functional prototype is near to a final product for the users to experience and attempt to integrate in their daily lives. However, it is expensive to create or change because it requires hours of work from programmers and graphical designers. The main purpose of the functional prototype is to beta test the product in the wild, ironing out bugs and design flaws, and gathering general long-term feedback from the users. One major takeaway from the manner the different prototypes are sequenced is that as complexity increases, so does the time and money expenditure, as well as the difficulty of altering the design. In other words, don't fall into the trap of making something look beautiful before you have properly informed and developed the foundation of the product, as well as the means of which it is interacted with. This not only wastes resources and lowers the speed of moving through the stages, but also hinders the users from evaluating the functionality rather than how it is presented. Evaluation in the HCI context is to critically examine the different iterations of the prototypes to generate insights through which to improve the prototype. Since it is necessary to evaluate the prototype before moving on to the next stage of prototyping, evaluation generally occurs intermittently within the prototyping work. The different stages of prototyping require different methods of evaluation, however. Methods that may work well for a paper prototype may not be particularly conducive towards evaluating a more advanced prototype. For example, an evaluation of a paper prototype can be facilitated through the use of the Wizard of Oz method, where the user goes through a scenario acting as the technology was real, with the facilitator or the wizard manually controlling the paper prototype to reflect the intended interaction. There are many types of evaluation suitable for each level of prototype. We will briefly outline some of the different methods and in which situations they are suitable. Keep in mind, however, that each design process is different, and in the end, you will have to make your own decisions about which methods make sense to use in your particular context. The methods are divided into two categories: inspection methods and empirical methods. Inspection methods are generally conducted with topical experts more so than with users, which in essence means that they are cheaper and quicker. Empirical methods are generally concerned with the user testing and normally happen after the inspection methods have ironed out the most obvious flaws. The inspection methods we will talk about are usability heuristics and cognitive walkthrough, and the empirical methods are think aloud and general user observation and interview.
Usability heuristics is a list of requirements that generate an understanding of the quality of a digital system. It is carried out through having one or more experts traverse the application with the heuristics in mind, taking note of whether or not the requirements are fulfilled, and finally discussing the result of the evaluation in order to correct the issues. There are many variations of heuristics, and you might even want to compile a list of your own values to update others to fit your needs, but the most common one within the realm of HCI is Nielsen's usability heuristic, so we suggest those as a baseline for any digital project. A cognitive walkthrough can be described as role-playing for the purpose of evaluation. It is carried out by one facilitator and at least one expert. In preparation of the evaluation, the facilitator creates a scenario and a number of user cases. These user cases are distributed to the expert, who then assumes the role of the imagined user. For example, the facilitator may ask the expert to assume the role of a 15-year-old teenager who wants information about sexually transmittable diseases. Through describing the scenario, for example, a first-time use of the application towards identifying the symptoms of chlamydia, the cognitive walkthrough process might paint a clearer picture of the interactions within the system and assumptions present in the user. Through the application of the inspection methods, the hope is that most of the obvious flaws of the design will be found. When the major issues have been addressed, we proceed to involve the user through the application of empirical methods. If you are a researcher, chances are that you are already familiar with some of the more generic methods of gathering empirical data, such as through observations and interviews. One of the most important things to keep in mind as a design researcher is that we are evaluating the design, not the users. This might represent an insecurity of the user as well, and as such, it is important to inform them that they are not under scrutiny, but rather offering their assistance in the design process. The Think Aloud method almost describes itself. The purpose of the Think Aloud is to have a user vocally cogitate about their interaction as they move through the system being evaluated. It can be loosely compared to a non-role-playing version of the cognitive walkthrough. The idea is simple enough, but it is not an immediately easy thing to do. The facilitator needs to create fitting scenarios for the particular user to evaluate, scenarios that also match the proposed user journey through the design. The idea is then to observe the user completing the tasks outlined by the scenario while continually thinking aloud, that is, saying everything that comes to their mind in the process. While the facilitator is not meant to disturb the process, it is critical to the evaluation that the user keeps vocalizing their thoughts, something that is not immediately intuitive for most people. Therefore, the facilitator needs to find ways to unobtrusively signal that the user needs to keep talking if they happen to fall silent. One way of doing this is by creating a meta-scenario, such as asking the user to describe their actions as if their grandmother would be sitting on their shoulder.
Having passed through the three first sections, research, prototype, and evaluate, one could think that there is a strong separation between them. This is not necessarily the case. Design is more complicated than that. These activities often overlap in various ways through the design process and as such are mostly separated on basis of their immediate goals. The fourth step, as outlined in the aforementioned list, is iteration. It is really not a step on its own, but a recursive call to do it all over again, repeating the process until the design is deemed to be able to reach its intended outcome. There may also be several concurrent design processes within the same larger context, each working in tandem on different parts of the project, and these processes may affect each other as they progress. All in all, the outline process shouldn't be considered to be used as a definitive guide, but rather as inspiration for a workflow that is tightly bound to the constraints of your particular project, constraints such as time, resources, knowledge, and access to user.
It's become time to wrap up this video. As you choose what to take away from this brief introduction to HCI and the design process, we want to summarize some things that we have talked about throughout the lesson.
First, being a designer is a mindset more so than a profession. The will to put in work to take a concept from what is to what should be.
Second, everyone with an interest in the outcome of your project should be considered a stakeholder, and you should consider yourself to be in service to them. Prior experience in a design process, while welcome, is not necessary. It is up to the designer to identify the possible contributions that stakeholders can bring to the project and involve them in a productive way.
Third, the design process is not absolute. You get to pick and choose which parts of it you want to use, but to be able to make the informed judgment, you might want to know about your options.
We hope that you have found this video educational.
If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to contact us.